My name is Max Stein.
And I'm Abby Curzon.
And this is the Not Your Average podcast. Spelled like a knot, which are things you don't want in your knitting. So this podcast is about all things yarn and fiber and knitting. And I think the inspiration comes from that Abby and I are both very passionate knitters, and we watch a lot of podcasts on YouTube, and I think one day we sort of just had a conversation like we could do this ourselves, for sure. And, during the COVID virus and the summertime, we have a lot of free time on our hands and figured it'd be a good time to jump into it. We've been talking about it for a while, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So, again, my name is Max Stein. I live in Calgary with Abby. I've lived here for not that long, about 8 or 9 months. And I play with the Calgary Philharmonic Orchestra. I play horn, French horn. So that's my profession. In terms of my knitting, I've been knitting for a little over 3 years. I started knitting at the end of my junior year of college. And I was going through some rough times in my life. I had just broken up with someone and sort of like lost touch with a few close friends. And also, actually, funny enough, was the summertime as well, which is not typically a time you'd start knitting, I think. But there was a beautiful yarn store in Ann Arbor, Michigan, which is where I was going to school at the University of Michigan. And I walked through it one day, and I was amazed at all the colors and the yarns, and just struck by all the finished objects in the store, so all the sweaters and hats and scarves. I never knew you could make the kind of complex things I saw in the store, and I think it inspired me to start knitting. And so that was the beginning of my knitting about 3 or so years ago. And I sort of took off from there. It was obvious to me in the first few months that it was something I really loved. And I learned very quickly, mainly through YouTube. Most of the things I learned were on YouTube, and I took a few classes here and there for more advanced things like color work and things like that as I went along. But I think I started knitting my first sweater maybe my 5th or 6th month into knitting, which seems like pretty fast to start doing a sweater. And the sweater was a little bit tight at the end, but it was pretty decent actually. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely a second passion for me. I think music has always been the main thing, and then I never thought that I would ever discover something that would rival music, and it turns out I did. And it's not just knitting for me; it's fiber and yarn, and I've gone into different kinds of sheep and traditions of knitting, and all that stuff is very interesting to me. So yeah.
Cool. So I'm Abby, and I live in Calgary as well. I was born in Calgary, and I grew up on a farm just southwest of Calgary. I started knitting probably 6 years ago when I was doing my master's degree. I'm a singer, and so I was doing my master's in voice, and I found that rehearsals were a long time to sit and just be on your phone when you weren't a part of the rehearsal. So I learned to knit for that. So my grandma taught me. I've never taken a class. My grandma just taught me how to knit and purl, and then I learned on YouTube.
So she taught you 6 years ago?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and then I just learned how to do stuff on YouTube, like, everything else. And I probably made my first sweater probably like 3 or 4 years ago, so it took me a little while to get on the sweater train.
It's probably smart because my first sweater didn't really fit, so.
Yeah, details. But yeah, and I'm a teacher. I'm an elementary school music teacher in Calgary. And yeah, and I mean, yeah, knitting, obviously music is a huge passion for me, as is knitting, as is doing fun stuff outside, particularly in the mountains. So yeah, those are kind of, I don't know. Did I miss anything?
No, I think that you hit on everything. So we should talk about how we met. So, I'm trying to think. When I first moved to Calgary, it was difficult because when you move to a new place, you oftentimes don't have any friends. I knew 0 people when I moved to Calgary, and I moved from Houston, Texas, which is where I was doing my master's degree, And funny enough, I was doing my master's at Rice, and that's where Abby did her bachelor's degree, right?
Yeah.
And so that's like an interesting point of connection that we discovered later. But when I moved to Calgary, I was trying to make friends with people, especially outside of work. And I think that knitting is sort of the gateway for me sometimes to meet people, and I go to knitting groups or whatever, and I was trying to look up classes and knitting groups around Calgary, and actually, surprisingly enough, I had a difficult time finding groups that were meeting weekly or groups that I felt like I would even fit in with. A lot of times they're groups of a lot of older people, older women typically, and not that I don't get along with those people, but I sort of was trying to find people either closer to my age or people sort of in a similar point in life who are also knitters, as passionate as me, and that is actually a quite difficult task. I think I met Abby the first time was at a Stash. So Stash is a knitting store in Calgary that we both love. There are many stores in Calgary. That's one of them. And I went to Stash for like a knit night that they were it was like a pop-up knit night that they did. And I went thinking there were going to be like a lot of people there. And it turned out I think there was only 3, including the 2 of us. And there was one other older lady who was there. And Abby was there, and I remember very specifically, Abby was wearing a colorwork sweater. I'm trying to remember if it was a cardigan or I think it was a cardigan.
It was my cardigan. It was my Nalchina.
Yeah, Nalchina cardigan. See, yes. So I remember I have a good memory of things like that, and I remember that. And once I saw that sweater, in my mind I was like, bingo, because I can tell. You can oftentimes tell as a knitter if something is handmade, someone else is wearing, and of course Abby was wearing a Nalchina, which is by. It's a Caitlin Hunter, yeah. And so that's a very popular pattern, so it's easy for knitters to sort of pick it out. But so for Abby to have knit that sweater, I knew that we would have a lot of connections. And it was so funny because I sat down and we ended up talking, and I found out that she was a music teacher, and I found out that she's a trained opera singer, and I'm in the orchestra, and it just was like so many points of connection. So quickly, and we're not that far apart in age, maybe like 6 or 7 years apart.
Yeah,
And so it worked out really well, and I don't know why this happened, but we didn't end up exchanging information. I don't know why. Maybe because we're both awkward or whatever.
Probably that.
Yeah. I mean, it's a little awkward to sort of like when you first meet someone 2 or 3 hours after you've hung out with them, being like, hey, can I get your number? But I guess with knitters, it's a little different because we're always looking for people to knit with. So it's more than just like a friendship. It's sort of like we always knit alone oftentimes, and so it's nice to have someone else to knit with. It's not just hey, want to hang out and be friends. It's also let's knit together because we have that point of connection. And I actually felt really stupid for not getting Abby's information. And there was I think this was like the beginning of the orchestra season, so this must have been in September, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think that I saw Abby again for a few months. And I think that I ran into Abby again, thankfully, at like a little fiber show, like close by, in the city, just like a small one, nothing like the size of these big festivals. And I went there, and actually it's funny, I don't think I went thinking I would run into Abby. I think I was hoping I would run into Abby again at like a knit night, like another pop-up knit night or whatever. But I was actually walking around this fiber festival, and there were a lot of people there, and I spotted this beautiful sweater. Again, another beautiful sweater, coloring sweater, and I spotted the sweater first, and then I looked up, and it was Abby, and of course I was like not surprised. And at that point, I think we just talked maybe like, I was with a colleague of mine who also did, so I think that what ended up happening is we talked for like 10 minutes, and then I basically said, we need to exchange information so that we can hang out. So yeah, and ever since then, we've become really close. It's gone like way beyond knitting, which oftentimes happens with people that you meet through knitting. You end up becoming close through so many other things. And for Abby and I think it was really easy to be friends because we have so many things in common. So there weren't a lot of barriers. Like, it wasn't hard. She understands my life as a professional musician, because she is a professional musician and was performing professionally for a while, still does, teaches professionally. So like we understand each other in that regard. We understand what it's like to be a professional musician, and all like the difficulties and challenges and things that come with that. So there's not a lot of explanation I guess. I don't have to explain a lot of things to you. I can just sort of tell her things that happen in rehearsals or things I'm frustrated with, and she just understands on a base level. And then, amazingly, we both tend to knit similar things. Like Abby definitely branches off and knits like a ton of things. She knits lace and color work and cables and all that sort of complexity. I sort of stay towards colorwork sweaters, but Abby does do a lot of colorwork as well, and she loves the same kinds of wool as me. Sorry, I'm talking a lot.
No, that's fine.
But yeah, that's how we met. But there's so many points of connection between Abby and I, and so we haven't been friends that long actually, but it feels like we have. And I would say Abby's definitely my closest friend in Calgary, and yeah.
Yeah.
I'm thankful for you.
Knitting besties.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah. So, do we want to do whips?
Sure. Do you have anything else to say about your knitting history or no? No pressure.
Well, I feel like I've started watching a lot of knitting podcasts and stuff, and I actually have a voice injury, which is in the process of healing, but I know knitting really helped me get through some of that, and so I'm really grateful for the podcast that I got to watch while I was am recovering, and so thanks to Grocery Girls Knits and Christy Glass.
Did I introduce you to Christy Glass?
Yeah, you totally introduced me to Christy Glass.
And then you watched every
episode
that she ever did.
Especially the farm ones. Oh my god, love sheep. And and Hohi's podcast, I really like that one as well. So thank you to those people in particular for getting me through some difficult times, I guess. But
because there were a few months there where you weren't able to work, right?
Where I wasn't able to do my job, which I love, and
because of the injury, so that it sort of helped like pass the time. And
yeah,
it can be lonely, I think, sometimes when you have a lot of time on your hands. I think a lot of people can relate to this now, but when you're sort of sitting home, especially when you're not working, when everyone else is working, oftentimes it's like you can't be with them because they're working when you're not.
Right. So
you have free time when people don't, and it can be a little bit lonely to just sit there and knit. I mean, I think that we're sort of used to it, but I think podcasts are really an amazing thing. So I think that they haven't really been around that long.
Right.
Like only a few years, I think, have podcasts really become like a really big thing in the knitting community, and I think that it's nice for us because it's just nice to have it. You almost feel like a personal connection to the people who are podcasting, like they're like almost like they're your friends.
Yeah.
It's a very weird thing, but they're so personable, and I think when you're a knitter in a new place, or if you live in a place where there aren't a lot of people who knit, or you don't know a lot of people who knit, it connects you to the knitting community. It makes you feel like you're not alone, and that's a really nice thing. And the two of us still continue to watch podcasts just because you learn so much and whatnot.
Yeah.
Okay, so whips. So do you want to start? What are you knitting on right now?
I have like a million things because I buy yarn and then I just have to knit with it right away. And if something takes too long because it's not cropped, then I start other projects. Yes.
You do end up knitting a lot of crop things.
Yes, I do because it's shorter. So this is the Airy sweater. And I believe it's by Isabel Kramer. It's made in, or it's being made in Lichen and Lace Rustic Sport, which is like one of my favorite new yarns. She's a Canadian dyer.
This is so pretty.
And this particular yarn is all Canadian sheep.
Oh my god. The moss stitch all across there? Yeah,
so it's taking a while because as you can see it is not cropped. This is the opposite of cropped. It's very long. So of course, but I do love it, and I can't wait to eventually be finished.
Does that have full length sleeves?
Yeah, it has full length. It'll be a really nice kind of relaxed fit, loose, comfy. And it's in sport weight. So that's one whip. Another whip is I kind of wanted something like happy because I've been like a little bit stressed about my job with how back to school is going to look like in the fall and all of that. I'm still very stressed about it. Mm-hmm. So I wanted something that was like happy and would make me smile. So I got this like Hedgehog fibers. I think it's Skinny Singles maybe, and it's this pattern is by Knitterella, and she just released it actually. It's called the Summer Trellis.
I'm gonna put a light on.
Top.
Keep going.
So I don't know if you can kind of. I guess you can't really see that there. Maybe I don't know.
Maybe hold it back a little bit.
It's hard to show the yoke because it's just started, but it's got these like slip stitch cables that crisscross around, and then this is the yarn, and it's the colorway is called Monet, and it's just it really looks like a cupcake to me. Looks very happy. And then the other day, Max and I decided to go shopping.
Which we often do together.
Yeah, either planned or unplanned. And we, I should mention that this Hedgehog is from Stash Lounge, and the airy sweater, the Lichen and Lace, is from Villacula Handmade. And so this is from Villacula Handmade as well. And we were there, a couple days ago. We went shopping randomly.
See if I can.
And this is Manos del Uruguay. Uruguay, I think I'm saying that right. And it's
is that just like a rib at the bottom?
Yeah, it's a twisted rib.
Wow.
So you're knitting
So
through the
pretty.
back of the loop and purling through the back loop, and that's called Mylo. So it's a merino linen blend, which I've never worked with merino and linen together before, and I'm kind of super into.
Yeah,
it.
merino and linen. It's interesting.
It's gorgeous, and this is going to be the Rift Tea by Jacqueline Cieslak. And I have to say her pattern is really, really well written. So.
Oh, you like it already?
Yeah, I really like it already.
Is it cropped too?
Yes, it's cropped. Yeah, it's cropped.
Do you? I mean, I guess you were knitting cropped things because you knit like your love notes I think in the middle of the year, like during winter time, didn't you?
Yeah.
So do you think you knit more crop stuff in the summer, or do you think you just knit whatever you like?
I just knit whenever. Yeah.
Because you do knit like full length sleeves and full length sweaters and stuff.
Yeah. I do. I have lots like the throwover and stuff like that. Yeah.
But I guess there are a lot of. I feel like there are a lot of new cropped sweaters. Like a lot of designers are knitting crop things, right?
Yeah.
I feel like that's a
Even
new
full
trend.
length sweaters, the actual sweater will be cropped.
Yeah, and people are liking like 3/4 sleeves and everything like that.
Yeah.
It's like a new trend. I think, but I mean, I guess it's a nice thing, or I think for knitters because it means you don't have to knit as much or buy as much yarn. Okay, is that all your
whips? Yes.
Okay, whips. Okay, so my whips. I don't have that many. This one is sort of like a whip or an FO. Okay, let's see if I can not drop my needles. So, this is a cardigan, or I guess it's a jacket technically, that I'm knitting. It's called the Wave of Change jacket by Denise Byron, I think is how you say her name. Denise Byron Handmade. And it's a pattern that she released maybe like a few months ago. And I'm knitting it in Brooklyntweed, which is a yarn that we both love. And it's like a woolier yarn for sure. And so this is the jacket. And it's in this really nice sort of mustardy yarn, mustardy color. It's a little bit difficult to see in the sunlight. You can sort of see the yellow of it. And it's a fairly straightforward pattern. I mean, I don't think I've ever knit a cardigan or a jacket before. But I really liked the pattern when it came out, and I liked how easy it was to style it in different ways. And I certainly did a lot. I mean, I added a ton of length to this, and I added length to the sleeve as well. And I typically do that with a lot of sweaters because as a guy, a lot of sweaters aren't knit with the intention of a man's body. So it just tends to be that my shoulders are broader than the sweater is knit for, or the person who knits a sweater oftentimes knits it with the intention of a certain body type and then uses that standard body type for all the sizes, and oftentimes it doesn't. Of course, it's not going to fit everyone's body. I'm sure some sweaters don't fit even your body in some ways. So you have to sort of figure out how to adjust it or block it out or stretch it or add stitches, take away stitches. And I'm starting to do that more and more as I get comfortable doing that with sweaters. Like for this one, for instance, I completely didn't follow the sleeve directions at all. I basically started with this amount of stitches that she said to start with, and then I followed her. I used her decrease, so the stitch decreases that she was doing, but I did a completely different order, different in terms of like how I did a lot more at the top, and then I slowed it down and did them a lot slower over time, and then I basically just like took notes on how quickly I was doing the decreases, and then I went back and did the exact same on the next one. And the nice part about top-down sweaters is that you can try them on. So like I think you and I did a lot of top-down stuff because we like to be able to try it on over time and see how it fits on our shoulders, or if it's too small here or too small there, whatever. And so I actually was able to put my arm through the sleeve as I was going, and so sort of seeing, okay, now I need to decrease more, etc. I wouldn't say I'm that muscular, but a lot of sleeves are really tight up here in this area for whatever reason. So that is the Wave of Change jacket, and I'm like binding off currently. I'm just doing the button band, which it's going to be a buttonless button band because I don't think I'm going to put buttons in it. I think I'm probably going to add snaps.
Ooh, that'll look nice.
I don't know how to sew, so we'll see how that goes. To sew snaps in. Do you know how to sew?
A little bit.
You might have to do
I
that
can
for
help
me.
You. Yeah.
But yeah, so that sweater is a Wave of Change jacket, and it's in this is in Quarry, the Brooklyntweed yarn. I'm not sure I'm gonna have to use this skein rather, after all, but we'll see. In this beautiful color, I think it's called citrine. Yeah, so that's my main work in progress. And the second thing that I'm working on right now is a test knit, and it's actually my first test knit. And for those of you, a lot of you probably know what a test knit is, but for those who don't, a test knit is basically a pattern that hasn't been released yet by a designer. So it's not for sale and it's not available to the public, and usually the designers will like put out a call for people to test knit the design and basically tell you like what the characteristics of it are, and if you get chosen for it, then you get access to the pattern, I guess, early. And I guess because it's not released yet, there still might be things in the pattern that need to be fixed or adjusted to make it better, but I think at that point it's still tech edited before people actually knit it, so all the numbers and everything technically should be correct at that point. I haven't done test knits, but largely it's just because I think a lot of designers have people they go to for test knitting, right? Like Caitlin Hunter and Andrea Mowry and Joji Locatelli. Some of these like bigger designers, I think they have a group of people, like 10 people that they always go to. Those people always want to test knit their designs, and they know that these people are gonna knit really beautiful sweaters of their designs, and so there isn't necessarily like an open call for just whoever wants to. So this designer, his name is Corrado Lark, and he is a male knitter, pattern designer, and he lives in New York City, and he's been designing a lot of stuff recently. He's just started designing sweaters, and I've been following him on Instagram, and he put out a call, like an open call on Yarn Pond, which is this site that designers use to just like sort of put out an open call to whoever wants, and you can submit like an application and talk about your knitting and etc. And then they choose you, or they don't, I guess. But I applied for this size. Like I saw him post about it, and I of course wanted to knit my own size, and so I applied for that size. I think it was like the 46 inch or 47 inch, so it's like a few inches of ease. And it's basically, the pattern is a t-shirt, like a knitted t-shirt. And I think I'm not sure what the name is. You can check out his Instagram, Corrado Lark, and it's I think he's calling it the hybrid tee or the wolf tee, or he's still trying to decide on the name. It hasn't been released, but it's a top-down t-shirt, and it's fairly simple. Like it's pretty much just all stockinette from the top down, and I think the reason why it's called a hybrid tee is there are increases in the yoke, as you would normally do on a top-down sweater, but the difference is he's not using just one kind of increase pattern for the sweater, so it's not just raglan increases, it's not just yoke increases, it's sort of both combined. So the yarn I'm using for this, I just started this yesterday. This is also Brooklyntweed, and it's actually their new yarn that they just released. It's called Dapple. Do I have a scan of it? I think I have a scan of it, yeah. And it's this really beautiful wool cotton blend yarn. I don't think does Brooklyntweed have another cotton blend yarn?
I don't
think so.
No.
I think they have like pretty much exclusively wool yarns, and it's called Dapple, which is a sort of like cute name, like to dapple in something. It's a cute name. And this color is called Canopy. I like that name. It's funny how names can sometimes
attract you.
Yeah, I actually was very attracted to the name as much as the yarn itself. But you can sort of see there's like flecks in it, little flecks of cotton in it. But it's just like this sort of like muddy green color, which is beautiful, and I love green. And then I got a contrast, so that the sweater is essentially green throughout. And then there's, I don't think I have the gray yarn.
Gray?
Oh, I have it over here. This is the
Oh no!
wrapped around everything. So this is the gray yarn, and this is like a gray that I got. I just got one skein, and it's just a contrast for the cuffs and the hem and the ribbing up here. And so you can see it's top down, and you can see I really like how that's looking, like the gray.
Yeah.
It's actually a lot more striking than I thought.
Yeah, it's nice. But
Like it's like the blocking between the colors are actually it's a lot more striking than I thought, but I really like it.
Well, in the gray, you can see a bit of the gray and the green too.
Yeah, there's like little flecks in there.
Yeah.
But I love this yarn. So it's 60% wool and 40% cotton, and it was just released, and it's a DK weight. And so because it's a test knit, I won't talk more about like the rest of it, but it's a great pattern, and I'm really excited to be knitting it early, and yeah, I really recommend this yarn a lot. I mean, it's super soft. I typically don't knit with anything other than 100% wool. And I don't even typically knit with superwash. I usually just go for either more rustic stuff or merino. So this is venturing into new territory for me with Dapple. But as you can see, I'm not wearing a sweater right now, even though I normally would be, because it's really hot here in Calgary, or really hot, at least for us. It's very sweaty, and it's just like not exactly the kind of weather that you want to be knitting wool things in. But I mean, we're still doing it. I'm still knitting a wool, that jacket is in wool. I'm still knitting in wool. But it was sort of the perfect thing, because I sort of was thinking, I would love to have something to wear in the summertime, or something where it's not just when it's freezing outside. And so when he sort of put this call out, I was excited to jump on it. And then it just sort of worked out. Like Brooklyntweed, I think like 2 days after I put in my name for this test, like released this cotton wool blend. So the universe sort of aligned on that one. I think that's all my whips. I have some whips that are in hibernation for like eternity. And I don't think that they count as whips. I don't think I'm ever going to work on them again. But that's what I'm actively doing. I tend to, unlike Abby, I think knit on less things at one time, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know if I knit as quickly as Abby too. Abby knits very, very fast, and I think she knits a lot more hours than I do, even though I do knit a lot also. And she's able to like whip out many things at a time. So don't be deceived by all her whips. She will definitely finish many of those very soon. And now you have to, because it's on camera.
Yeah, I guess it's true. It's kind of binding now.
Okay, so we did whips.
We did whips, now FOs.
FOs. Do you want to go?
Sure.
FOs.
So I picked FOs that I felt like were kind of things that I could wear maybe in the summer, maybe in the spring, maybe in the fall. Nice like multi-season whips.
Yeah.
Or not whips, FOs. So this first one that I'm going to show is my second love note by Tin Can Knits. And I picked as much Canadian stuff as I try to buy as much Canadian yarn as I can. And so this is, the yarn is Lily and Pine. I used her sock base and her alpaca lace. That rhymes. And the alpaca lace is Aran Blue, and I can't remember.
I think you have alpacas on your dress.
I definitely have alpacas on. I themed today. I was like, I have to wear my alpaca dress because we're doing our first podcast. But yeah, so alpaca, and and I can't remember what color the sock base is, but I love it. As you can see, it's cropped, and I did the sleeves to the elbow because I just wanted something kind of.
Is this your second one?
Light, yeah. This is my second one. So I'll show my first one is a little bit longer.
Ooh.
And my first one is in Lichen and Lace,
You want me to do it?
merino fingering, I believe. And then her marsh mohair. And this one is quite a bit longer, like several inches longer, and the sleeves are a bit longer as well. It's kind of interesting because sock and fingering yarn are often thought of as being interchangeable, but I find that there is actually a difference in thickness between sock yarn and fingering.
You think sock is thicker?
Yeah.
Is this
sock
sock
this is sock what I'm wearing.
It does look thicker.
And this is fingering, so I do think if you are doing a love note and you want a thinner love note, I would go with fingering weight, and if you want something that's a little bit thicker, then definitely make it in sock, obviously with the mohair. I also think the alpaca behaves slightly differently than the mohair, even though they look very similar in terms of...
It definitely looks a lot different. I think that possibly also like the nylon or the whatever synthetic fibers in the sock yarn that would normally be there for like someone to knit socks might also give the yarn like a more like a hefty structure, which makes it bigger.
Totally.
You know what I mean? Like the stitches definitely look bigger on. I mean, they both look great, but you're right. Like the mohair looks completely different than the alpaca, and the sock looks completely. It's interesting how you knit the same pattern with technically the same kinds of materials, like different fiber, but like the same thinness of materials, but they look so different.
But I kind of love that. Like you can make the same pattern more than once if you love it. And have it look different and feel different.
Yeah.
And then this is my Cipolla sweater. This is by Caitlin Hunter.
Oh my gosh.
And I did it with the long sleeves. I should have taken the gleaner over it, but I'm moving soon, so I packed it. But this is Ancient Art Lascaux Fine. And so it's got this really strange looking sheep.
Look at that sleeve.
Yes.
Is that the same pattern as the yoke?
Yeah, it's similar.
She really does that, right? She like takes the yoke pattern and is able to get it down to the sleeve, and it's
quite
so
similar
nice
to the yoke. But yeah, I really like it. I love the drapiness of this yarn. It's very sticky and rustic.
That's Ancient Art.
Ancient Art's Lascaux Fine. And it's a fingering weight. So, and this one I did make slightly cropped as well, because that's apparently my thing. I probably because I get bored and then I want to finish it. And then this...
Oh, so that wasn't written to be cropped?
I think it was written to be slightly cropped. Okay. I feel like all her sweaters are...
a lot of Caitlin Hunter sweaters are written to be cropped, yeah.
And then this is the Early Bloomer. And I believe it's by Heidi Kirkmeyer.
Sure.
Let's go with that. I can look on my phone in a minute.
What's it called?
It's called the Early Bloomer.
Is it on Ravelry?
Yeah, it's on Ravelry.
I'm sure it's easy to find on Ravelry.
And it's in my finished objects. So, and I love this. It's out of Rowan Silk Baby.
Did you get this at
Alpaca Dk or something like that? No, I actually got this as a birthday present. My boyfriend's mom got it for me and sent it from Edmonton.
I like this detail. You can sort of see like the white. There's just like a. Did you just bind off for the different color?
Yeah. Yeah, and so
really
and then
like
the white is Patagonia, Juniper Moon Patagonia.
So they're not the same yarn.
No, and they actually function very differently, like in terms of texture. Like the Silk Baby Merino something DK, the Rowan is very like shiny and super washy, if that's a term.
Super washy.
And then the Patagonia is very like sticky, rustic.
They look really good together. Like I would never be able to guess that they're different.
I really like it because I think it does make the color work pop a little bit more. So yeah.
Well, whites are really good. I haven't actually done color work where I've used I don't think white as the contrast color, but that's great. Okay. Cool. Is that all?
Yeah, that's all. I'm good.
Okay. I think I only have one FO to show.
Sorry.
I have knit. Like I tend to stick to like one sweater at a time, and I usually knit the sweater from beginning to end. I oftentimes, Abby can probably attest to this, I oftentimes stop somewhere in the middle, like about 50, 60, 70% of the sweater. It's usually when the sweater gets a little monotonous after I've done the fun parts. I do a lot of top-down sweaters, as does Abby, so we both know like the most fun part is typically the top. And then once we finish it and we're on the body, it's just endless stockinette, usually. And at that point, it becomes a little bit more monotonous oftentimes. And I typically will put the sweater away and start another sweater that is usually like completely in contrast to that sweater. So if this one is all color work, then this one is going to be very basic. If this one's small yarn, this one will be big yarn. I just sort of like want a different taste, and I'll usually knit that sweater up until the same point, and then I'll put that away and go back to the other one and finish that one. But I'm pretty good about finishing a sweater from beginning to end in like relatively short period of time. But I instead of like knitting a sweater from beginning to end over 2 months, I'll usually knit 2 sweaters from beginning to end over like 5 or 6 months. So my recent FO, which I'm very proud of, is my Lunenburg pullover. It's by Amy Christophers, and I think it's a fairly well-known pattern in the knitting community. It's gorgeous. I love this yoke so much. It has sort of like a boho stickening inspired texture. So boho stickening is a tradition. Stickening means knitting. I think it's either a Norwegian or some Scandinavian language. And boho, I think it just means that when you're knitting, there's purling sometimes in the yoke, or rather purling in the color work. So typically when you do color work in stockinette. Like you wouldn't add any sort of like stitches to it. But in here, there's pearls sort of thrown in that pop out, which I think is like a nice texture. And it's a little bit complicated to purl with color work, but if you have the patience, it's really beautiful. And then this yarn is Donegal Tweed, I think it's called, and it's an Irish yarn, and it's in sport weight. And I bought it from another knitting store in Calgary that I go to because it's close to where I live. It's called The Loop. It's in Kensington, around like, I think it's 17th. Yeah. And I bought this yarn there, and it has this beautiful purple, and I don't know if you can tell, but the tweed is like, there's all these different colors that are popping out of it.
You can't even see it, like when you bought it, you didn't even see all
I couldn't
the
tell.
nubbins or nuts or whatever that were in it. Yeah.
I couldn't tell until it was knitted up, which oftentimes happens with yarn. You don't always know exactly how it's gonna behave. But I love it, and it's my first like fingering sport weight sweater, so it's on the lighter side, but it is 100% wool, and the body felt like it was never going to end, but it did end, and then yeah, so I'm really happy about that. And then my other wave of change jacket is sort of an FO because I'm like one button band away from being done and like sewing, so like that's essentially an FO as well as a whip. But yeah, I don't think I finished anything else recently. I feel like it's disappointing talking about my FOs compared to your FOs.
It's because I'm like, yeah, anytime I'm like a little bit stressed, I'm like, knitting! Gotta start.
Well, I think there was a period of time when so I went home to Florida from Calgary, which is where my family's from. I went to Florida in mid-March, and I was in Florida for 3 months, actually, before I flew back to Calgary. And for whatever reason, the first like 2 months I think I was in Florida, I didn't knit at all, which I think Abby remembers. Like there was a time, remember I like just stopped knitting?
Yeah.
And we were talking about it and how strange it was. I like really just didn't knit at all for 2 months, which I don't know why that happens. It does happen every year or so. There's always like a 2-month period where I don't knit at all. I'm not sure why. I'm not sure if it's because like whatever's going on in my life. Oftentimes it's usually in transitions, like when there's like a big transition, either I move someplace and I'm like really stressed and anxious, and like it's interesting because I think that knitting would probably help me if I was stressed, but I just lose the motivation or the what did you call it, like your knitting mojo, like just like the overall just like angst to do it. Like I feel like for both of us, like every day like we want to knit, there's like an itch to knit, and like I sort of lost it, and it's hard to like force yourself to do something you really don't want to do for whatever reason. So as sad as that is, it happened for 2 months, which I think is partially why I don't have as many FOs as you. But I got it back, and it's very much back, and I'm killing it again with the knitting and the yarn purchases. Okay. So,
I think also you probably weren't knitting as much because you didn't really have anyone that also knit. You know,
yeah, that's true.
Florida, and you didn't have like your knitting store that you go to or whatever. Like.
Yeah, it's true. When I first moved to Calgary, I didn't knit very much the first 2 months. I think I was just adjusting to everything. I didn't have really any close friends. I didn't have any like close knitters, and it is very motivating to knit with other people. And like Abby inspires me with her knitting and inspires me to purchase yarn and spend money I don't have because of all the beautiful yarn. But we do the same thing to each other, so I don't feel bad.
Yeah.
But yeah, so FOs. We did FOs. Do you want to do acquisitions? Do you have
I don't have acquisitions, so it's.
So that's gonna be my category for today. She did. I think you do have acquisitions, but you've already started all of them.
Yeah, I buy things and I have to start immediately because no self-control.
It's amazing. I mean the bubble gum, is that what it's called? The bubble gum yarn. You just bought that like a week and a half ago.
Yeah, this and I'm like almost.
And look how far she is in that, and there's like cabling in it.
Yeah.
And it's fingering weight. I'm amazed at how quickly you knit fingering weight. Okay, so FOs. So I don't knit socks, though I know how to knit socks. But for some reason, I like to buy sock yarn occasionally, and I don't know why. It doesn't make any sense when you say it that way. But I told myself the reason I don't like to knit socks is because sock yarn is oftentimes like superwash merino, or it's oftentimes like hand dyed, indie dyed stuff. And I tend to not knit with that sort of stuff. I tend to knit with more rustic wools. And there's sort of like an inspiration I gather from more rustic wools. I like to know like where the yarn comes from, the farm, whatever it is. I like to know the kinds of sheep. I like to know how it's spun, where it's dyed. Like I like all that stuff. And I also prefer for it to not to be processed a ton. Whereas the hand-dyed yarns, I think, are processed a decent amount in order to make them super wash so they can be put in a washing machine. And they're beautiful yarns, and it's a huge sector of the knitting community, and many people love them. And I know Abby loves hand-dyed yarns, and they are gorgeous. Like, don't get me wrong, they are gorgeous. But for whatever reason, for me, I tend to like the more rustic yarns. And so I've told myself, well, maybe you need to knit socks with yarn you like instead of the sock yarn that most people would knit with. The hard part about that is you typically wouldn't knit socks with 100% wool because there needs to be some nylon or something in there to stop it from felting, like when you're walking, to stop it from like opening up and holes and all that stuff. And so that's where the superwash actually becomes like a really important component, I think, of the yarn, because it gives it that toughness so that it doesn't open up or felt or things like that. So I found this yarn. It's called Exmoor sock yarn. I believe it's from John Arban, which is in the UK. I believe it's in Devon, actually. Yeah, North Devon. Wow, I'm surprised I remember that. And it's called Exmoor sock yarn, and it's this beautiful rustic yarn from the UK. There are a lot of beautiful yarns from the UK. A lot of more rustic yarns you'll find in the UK, and it's 60% Exmoor blue face. 20% Corrado, 10% Zwarbles, and 10% nylon, which is amazing. The name Zwarbles. Zwarbles. Look how it's spelled. Zwartbles. Oh, wow. I don't think it's Zwartbles. I've heard them say
I'm gonna Google what that
Zwartbles.
looks like.
It's a very interesting looking sheep. I've actually looked it up. It might actually be on my sheep poster back there. But I have a British breeds sheep like chart. That shows all the British breeds. But yeah, so it's a 4-ply sock yarn, and so it has mainly different combinations of wool, and then there's 10% nylon, and I think actually part of the wool is superwashed. They've superwash treated like 20 or 30% of the wool as well, because 10% nylon isn't enough. It wouldn't be enough, I think, for it to really like do anything. And I got 2 skeins of the blue, which are basically going to be the base color of the socks, and then this sort of like rusty orangey color is going to be the heel, the toe, and the what would you call it? The ribbing around the heel, the cuff. I don't know what you call that of a sock. the top part of the sock.
Is it the gusset? No, that's the toe.
I think the gusset is like.
I don't make it up.
Whatever.
I've made
so
one
this is the contrast. This is the contrast. And trying to think if I said everything about that. Yeah, so that's from John Arban, and my plan is to knit a pair of socks in that. It's called the Umbrella Socks pattern, and it's by K.F. Jones. K. Jones. Umbrella Socks, and it's on Ravelry, and it's a fairly straightforward pattern. And I picked it mainly because she knit the pattern with the contrast heel and toe and everything like that in mind, so that I didn't have to figure that out on my own. I don't knit socks a lot, so I'm not exactly sure where I would switch colors and different things like that. And interesting enough, this pattern has an afterthought heel, which means typically with socks you would knit either from the top down, so from the ankle down, or from the toe up. And either way, typically you would do the heel as you go. So once you get to the heel, you would knit the heel and then go up or go down. But there are many different ways to knit a heel, and it's called the afterthought heel. And I think essentially what it is you just don't knit the heel. You knit. I think her pattern is top down, so from the ankle down, and you knit down. And instead of doing the heel, you do basically you either put the stitches on like a holder, or you just like, I don't know, you just like leave a gap there and you just keep knitting down, and then you go back, hence the afterthought, and you knit the heel. And apparently it's an easier heel to do than some other heels with German short rows and a heel flap and whatever. But so that's called the umbrella socks, and I feel like I'm hoping to actually cast them on soon. I just need the right needles. I don't have the right needles for sock yarn, so I ordered like a set of DPNs from Chaogu, which is like the needles I love. DPNs of Chaogu, because this yarn is so rustic. It doesn't, with wool, it just like wouldn't move. So that's an acquisition. Another acquisition is I got this book recently, and it's called The Topdown Sweaters, Knitter's Handbook of Topdown Sweaters by Arban, who is I would say fairly prominent like knitting designer, pattern writer, just overall fiber genius. And she's very popular, at least in the US. Do you know Arban? You heard of Arban?
No, I haven't.
Well, she wrote, at least in the US, like a lot of people I know her, and she wrote this book about sock knitting, and she has a ton of books. I highly recommend like looking her up and finding her books. But this book is really amazing, because essentially what it is she gives you all the different, she's basically done the math for you for top-down sweaters. So most top-down sweaters all have a similar basic construction in terms of like the top, there's usually short rows to lift the back, there's increasing as you go down, and you usually put the sleeves on a holder and you knit that. Like they're pretty much all this is similar. The way you increase and the way you get to different parts of the sweater could be different, but overall the math and the construction is pretty similar. And so in this book, she basically has consolidated it all down to numbers and gauge. So typically I think what Abby and I do is we either find a pattern that we like and then we buy yarn for it. I think that's typically how we do it. I don't usually buy yarn and then find a pattern. I like to know what pattern I'm going to knit with. And then I basically use the pattern to guide what kind of yarn I think will go well with it. And usually I pick a yarn that has a similar gauge or recommended gauge to the pattern. So like 16 stitches for 4 inches, if that's what the pattern wants. I usually try to find a yarn that's similar, or I try to follow what the pattern designer recommends. That way we both have a better idea. We know that the end product will come out the way that we want it to, that way. But this is sort of like a backwards method. So essentially what you can do with this book, which is amazing, is that you can find a yarn that you like, and you can knit a swatch out of it, and you can find the gauge that you like. So however tight or loose you want to knit the yarn, you can pick a gauge. So let's say you like 20 stitches and 4 inches in this yarn, and instead of looking for a pattern for that gauge, which might be difficult depending on the yarn or whatnot, you can look in this book and you can basically essentially look up the gauge of the yarn of the weight. You can look it up in this book, and she has all these different pattern constructions of top-down sweaters, and she'll just give you the numbers. Like she basically has a chart, and it shows like based off different gauges how many stitches to cast on, how many stitches to put for the sleeve and the front and the back, and you just basically follow the directions based off the gauge that you got on that yarn, which is pretty amazing, because that means that you can knit that yarn at any gauge you want and still knit a sweater. I think it does require, though, some understanding of top-down sweaters, like understanding like why you do it increases and why you put the sleeves on the holders, and like why you cast on stitches underneath, and like certain things like that. I think you need to know and understand, because they're not patterns. Like this book isn't a pattern. It's more just sort of, she does the math for you, the counting for you, and it is there are like step-by-step directions, but it isn't like a pattern where it holds your hand through every step. So I think you need to sort of have an understanding of sweater knitting, at least in order to, I think, use this book efficiently. And I'm still sort of getting into it, but you can see like it's just basically like charts and charts of numbers. So to someone who like doesn't knit sweaters or doesn't understand how to knit a sweater, like it just looks like gibberish.
Right, but if you wanted to design a sweater, it'd probably be very useful.
If you wanted to design a sweater, you definitely could use this book. and I'm not sure like what legal like things go along with that. Like if you were to design a sweater using her book, if you could like sell that sweater, I'm not sure. Probably. But yeah, and most of the sweaters in here are pretty basic. So this is just a framework. So you can use this to like knit a colorwork sweater if you want and make your own pattern. It's just a framework. She's not sort of like trying to help you knit a beautiful sweater with all these different details. She's just helping you with the basic construction. So I'm interested in sort of delving more into that. I'm gonna have to spend like a day or two just like reading through that. So that's another thing. And then this is Abby's fault. This next purchase is Abby's fault, completely and utterly. So the Lichen and Lace, which is what Lichen and Lace Rustic Sport, which is what Abby is knitting that the beautiful sweater in. It's just to die for. So she brings yarn to lunch or something, and then or a sweater and holds it up, and I touch it, and then it's just like, God dang it. So then we went to Villacula, which is where she bought that yarn, and it's very fairly priced, this Rustic Sport yarn. I think it's like $12 Canadian or something like that, which I looked it up online. It's $8.90 a skein US, which is insane. That is so cheap for US yarn, for US priced yarn, and it's gorgeous. Like this is luxurious yarn. This is not like there's nothing bad about knitting with cheaper yarn, but this yarn is like high quality yarn, like good wool, like obviously well spun, like really dyed, you know, with thought and care. And so the price, I don't know why the price is so low, but I'm not gonna question it, you know. I'm not gonna ask to pay more. I'm not gonna ask to pay more money. So I basically bought yarn to make a trove. It's called a Trove sweater, and it's by Emma Dutcher or Dutcher. And this is a sweater that was in a Pom Pom quarterly. I think it was like a winter. Was it winter?
I thought it was
maybe autumn. I think it's either autumn or winter. And Abby showed it to me, and it's beautiful. And I'm hoping that we'll both make it at some point. And I bought. It's a colorwork sweater, but there isn't stranded colorwork. It's slip stitch colorwork, which is actually something I haven't done.
It's mosaic knitting. I think.
Yeah, it's like mosaic knitting or something, and where you don't actually have to knit with two colors in a round. You always knit with one yarn, and then you slip the other one. I think. Yeah. That's how I understand it. Exactly. And so people who don't do stranded colorwork, where you actually have to knit with two yarns at a time, it's probably very accessible to them. For me, it's
easier colorwork than stranded.
Okay, so that's good. I'm a little intimidated by it because it's not what I typically do, but it's funny because I think it actually stranded colorwork is much more difficult. Yeah. So I got for the body of the sweater, I got this yarn. I think it's Sage, and it's like a little bit hard to tell because it's a little I'm not sure we'd say like it's just like it's a gray. I think it's a gray base that was over dyed with green. And so it's hard to tell here. It probably just looks gray, but next to the gray yarns that there's a woman who owns Lichen and Lace, right? Yeah. That she sells like her bases. It looks green. There's like a little bit of a hint of green that goes over it, and so the sweater is going to be in this like sort of lightly tinted gray yarn. Oh my God, it smells like a farm. So good. And then I got these 4 yarns for the contrast. Hold on, let's see if I can show these. So I got a really dark green, a really, really, really rich dark green. I got a gold, or like a mustardy. I got a white for like a little pop, and then sort of a rusty orange. And so those are the 4 that are going to go together with the gray. And I'm really excited to knit that at some point, but I unfortunately have to finish other things before then.
She's cool because she's a natural dyer too, which is...
Those are naturally dyed?
Yeah, they're all naturally dyed, which is really... I just think, you know, that makes the process so different too. So,
well, yeah. That's why I'm surprised that the yarn is cheap, because I feel like she would charge more. Maybe
well, and she can get, I mean, yes, she gets those like faint colors, but like this Love Note is also naturally dyed.
Oh, but that's not the same. That's not the same dyer, though.
Yeah, this is Lichen and Lace.
Oh, it is?
Yeah, this is her marsh mohair and her like merino.
Is it? Oh, it's fingering. Okay.
Yeah.
But that's with
base,
oh yeah.
Yeah.
The mohair makes that look a lot more variegated than. Maybe it is, or I mean, it is variegated. But
they're the same color though. They're the the same colorway in both the mohair and the fingering, but I just think
interesting.
one takes the dye a lot more. Like
Yeah. Well, that's another reason why Abby and I like wool is that like wool is really the best base to take color. Like it takes color so much better than cotton or linen or silk. And you see that when you look for yarn, you always see that the wools are always the brighter, like much brighter yarns. So it's no surprise that like wool is used in almost every yarn because it's just easier, especially for hand dyed. Like most hand dyed yarns, I think are usually 100% merino wool or superwash wool because like in order for them to have all the beautiful colors of hand dye, they have to have a fiber that like actually takes the color. Yeah. So wool is amazing. So that's a Trove sweater, and that's the end of my acquisitions.
Yeah.
Okay.
So now music inspiration.
Okay, so we're obviously both musicians, though we haven't talked about it a lot. We're probably going to focus mainly on, I would think, knitting and stuff like that in this podcast. But in terms of music, things that we've been listening to, or things I've been listening to, rather, I've been listening to a lot more music than I typically do. I think that it's because I'm not performing. The orchestra closed in mid-March, so I haven't been performing for a while. We typically would be on a break now anyway, but we would have only stopped like a few weeks ago, where instead it was many months ago. And while I'm playing, I typically don't listen to actually very much music outside of what I'm doing in the orchestra. So the programs that are coming up with the orchestra, with the Calgary Phil, I sort of make I have a binder where I keep all of my folders of upcoming programs, and I have recordings and I have scores and I sort of am listening to the music as it's coming up. But other than that, outside of that, I don't typically listen to a lot of classical music or really music at all. Which sounds like sort of sad, but I think it's just that when you're performing, for the first time in my life, I'm performing or playing, I guess, rather playing a lot, many hours every single day, consistently, week after week after week after week. And I think that it's just a lot. There's just a lot of auditory, I don't know what you call it, like stimulation. Yeah, like there's just a lot of stimulation for my ears and my head. And when I leave work, the one thing I want to do is not usually listen to music or even like go to a concert. It's typically I want quiet, or I want to watch a podcast, or I want to like watch TV or do other things. So I typically don't listen to a lot of music. So now in the summertime, and because of COVID, I've been listening to a lot more classical music. So I've been usually using these either using performances or recordings to inspire myself to practice, or just to keep the inspiration alive, since there's just like not a lot of live performance happening right now for obvious reasons. And so some things I've been listening to, the Montreal Symphony recordings. There's some recordings, famous recordings in the Montreal Symphony from I want to say like the 80s and 90s. I think it's with Charles Dutoit, I think is his name. I think it's spelled Dutoit. I don't speak French, but it's the Montreal Symphony like really came on the map, I think, with those recordings. They did a ton of recordings with him, and they're some of like the most famous and well-received recordings in history of orchestra. And so I've been going through. I have like a Montreal Symphony playlist, and it has 150 things or whatever they recorded, and I've been going through that and listening to. They have a really fantastic recording of Holst, The Planets by Holst. They have really fantastic recordings of the Rachmaninoff symphonies, of the Tchaikovsky symphonies, of Mahler, everything that you can think of they have on there. They also have the Tchaikovsky, Sleeping Beauty? Tchaikovsky Sleeping Beauty, which I think is that a ballet? Yeah, it's a ballet. They have a recording of a complete Tchaikovsky Sleeping Beauty ballet, which is like incredible. Highly recommend it. And so I've been listening to a lot of that on like bike rides, while I've been knitting. And then something that's French horn related, Sarah Willis, who is a horn player in the Berlin Philharmonic. Sarah Willis released a recent album. It's called Mozart y Mambo, and it's album that's a combination of the music of Mozart with the music of Havana and Cuba, so that style of Cuban music. And there's like a bunch of pieces on this album that are inspired by Cuban music and written for Sarah, arrangements for her playing. And there's a few recordings of Mozart concertos on this recording, but there's a few tracks that directly combine the Mozart concerto with Mambo or with Cuban music, and they're really fun, amazing arrangements, and very different than what you'd see normally with horn playing. You wouldn't typically see like a French horn player playing Cuban music. It's not a normal thing. We typically would record just like normal classical concertos. So this is a very different album, but it's super fun. Dance music. It's really nice to listen to, and it's called Mozart y Mambo by Sarah Willis, and that is on Spotify and Apple Music and wherever. And so those are the main things: Montreal Symphony and Sarah Willis. The Mozart y Mambo are the two things I've been listening to.
Cool. Well, I haven't been listening to music as much, but I'm starting to get more into it. For a while, like after my injury, which I think was diagnosed in December, I have basically I had a bleed on both vocal cords, which led to vocal dysfunction. And so I wasn't really listening to a lot of music because it just made me sad because I couldn't sing and I wasn't able to do my job as a music teacher for a while. But I started seeing a speech therapist, and my voice is really, really starting to heal, and I'm feeling a lot of success with that. So, now when I listen to music, I don't think, I'll never get back to how I used to sing opera. So now I'm feeling a lot more encouraged, and anyway, when we were fully kind of trying to stay home as much as possible, I think it was maybe like March or April, my boyfriend and I decided I have DVDs of operas with the Met, and so we decided to do an opera night where we got dressed up and in our own apartment and watched the Magic Flute.
But you got dressed up?
Yeah, we fully got dressed up because we miss I would go to concerts a lot, especially the Symphony to see Max and stuff, and so we really missed being at concerts and stuff. So we fully Mike put on a suit, I put on a pretty dress, and my Birds of a Feather shawl by Andrea Mowry, and we sat in our living room and watched the Magic Flute with I think Kathleen Battle was the Pamina, and I feel like it was their a production in 1996 or whatever.
Oh, it was amazing.
It was so
with Kathleen
amazing.
Battle, oh my gosh.
I mean, it was really, really good, and so I like Mozart. His music is really clear, and it's fun and it's bright, and so that was a really fun thing.
Funny
that I
too,
listened
right?
to.
Aren't his operas he has a few comedic operas?
Yeah.
Funny.
I mean,
even though people are being assaulted and murdered, it's still
Yeah.
there's still some funny. There's still some humor to it.
Well, and Die Flute is interesting because it's a German opera, so there is some dialogue as well, which is always interesting to listen to dialogue in German and read the English subtitles and just hear the different inflections and stuff. So
not just singing, but actual talking.
Yeah,
Interesting.
And I've started singing a little bit of opera. It'll probably be a year before I'm back to normal. But I've started singing some musical theater pieces. So I started singing People Will Say We're in Love from the musical Oklahoma. And so I've been listening to that a bit, and that's been really fun as well. So, yeah.
Do you like musicals?
Yeah. Especially the old musicals. I know that there's lots of problematic things about them, but the music is really, really beautiful.
I don't think I know that about you, that you like musicals. We haven't talked about musicals.
Yeah.
I also love musicals.
That was how I got into wanting to study opera. I started out at 12 taking voice lessons and being I really like musicals, and then I discovered opera and I was this is even better.
Well, I mean, there's just something so, I don't know how you describe it, something so light about, musicals can be very dark too, but a lot of the famous musicals, the music is about love and life, and it's just it's very uplifting stuff, and it's easy to follow, and it's not the tunes are oftentimes really beautiful and easy to remember and memorize. And I mean, my favorite musical composer I think is Sondheim, Stephen Sondheim.
Yes.
I mean, I just love all his stuff. I mean, at almost any musical that's famous, there's been some influence of Sondheim. And some of his stuff can be pretty dark too, but I just love his music too, and I don't think that it's surface level. I feel sometimes some musicals can be surface level, about surface level things. Or the music isn't actually super complex. It sort of stays on a pretty basic poppy thing. And I think Sondheim is one of those composers that really made a musical into a complex thing that deserves its own respect and study. I think as a classical musician, sometimes we see like musicals and the music of musicals as like not being nearly as complex or worthy of study as classical music. But like Sondheim is for sure one of those composers that is like very well respected, and Into the Woods and West Side Story and Sweeney Todd and just all the different. That's just one of many he did.
Well, and you can listen or watch his musicals more than one time and get more out of it. Like it's like a good book that you can read over and over again and still learn something. Like To Kill a Mockingbird. Like you could read that book so many times and still learn something new from it.
Mm-hmm. So. I think that's when it's really good art, or it's a good book or good music or good whatever it is, like good movies. Like when you watch it more than one time and you're discovering new things because there's so much like detail put into it. So other than music, you've been doing a lot of hiking.
Yeah, I mean, not as much as I typically do. But
you started again.
I'm kind of a mountain person, so I hike, I scramble, I rock climb. It's kind of the benefit of being so close to the mountains here that we can really enjoy the outdoors. PSA, like if you're not, if you haven't done a lot of hiking in the Rockies, I would highly recommend going with someone who does and has, and really reading up those trip reports before you go. There's lots of new people into hiking now, and we're starting to see lots and lots of accidents, which is problematic, especially with COVID. So especially if you're doing scrambling, which is basically hard hiking on very loose rock, make sure you have all the tools, like correct hiking boots that are higher, like so that you have ankle support, and you're wearing a helmet where there's lots and lots of loose rocks, so that you're keeping yourself and your friends and others safe. So that's my PSA, but I love the mountains.
That's good advice. And I've actually I started hiking for the first time, and I haven't done like a hike yet with Abby, but I've been sort of trying to get back in shape, like biking down the river, and I went on 2 hikes recently, and they're sort of like increasing in difficulty. But we live in Calgary. We're like an hour or so away from Canmore and from Kananaskis, where the mountains sort of like begin. And there's some like really gorgeous hikes out there. And then if you go farther to Banff, and it's not just Banff and Canmore and Kananaskis, you can go west and then go south. You can go north. There's like so many different.
You can go to Crow's Nest Pass. Yeah.
There's like so many different places to hike and discover hundreds and hundreds, I'm sure, of trails and mountains and things to hike. But it is inherently dangerous, and like I think it's important to go with people who know what they're doing. And so, like the 2 times I've gone hiking in the past 2 weeks, I've gone with friends who are very experienced hikers, and I also got good boots with Abby's recommendation, which was a little bit of a splurge, but like totally. Please do not go on hikes. I would even say even the easier ones, like I would still say get hiking boots, like because what's quote unquote easy for someone else might not be easy for someone who's never done it before. And the hiking boots just give you like so much traction. Like you just have more stability. It's not that you couldn't do it without them. I'm sure you could, but it's more dangerous. And like, why would you choose to put yourself in more danger? Especially if you're going to do hikes, you should it's an investment. And it's not just for, like the trend of getting cute hiking boots. It's for safety. Like it's for your safety and other people's safety.
And the biggest thing is the other people's safety, because like if you don't know how to walk on loose rock, or you're not careful, like you could actually hurt someone else. You're a danger to yourself for sure, but you're also a danger to someone else. Or if you get hurt and have to be rescued, and you had COVID that you didn't know about, like you could pass that on to the rescuer, which isn't fair.
So overall, just like make safe choices and like do your research and have a friend, find people. Like I have Abby and I have a few other friends, and like a lot of people in this area are experienced, but like find people who are really experienced and know and prioritize safety.
Yeah, and that care. Like there's a lot of people that have the mentality, oh well, whatever you learn as you go, or I'll take this friend and it'll be super epic, and that's great. But I think if you're taking your friends out and you are more experienced, just make sure that you know the level they're at, and be comfortable with coaching them if that's what they require, I guess. Yeah. Awesome.
Well, thank you for joining us for our first podcast. I think that we're going to finish now. That we're over an hour into this,
Oh,
which is a lot longer than I thought we were gonna go. But that's okay.
Yeah.
The two of us, that's why we get along, is we talk back and forth. And also my camera is like, I think possibly about to die. So we're going to finish up. But I hope you've enjoyed this podcast. We're going to try and do another one again soon and update you on the things that we're knitting and making and music things and hiking things. But we're pretty much going to stay focused on yarn and patterns and everything like that. But I hope you enjoyed the podcast. I love Abby and I love spending time with Abby, and so I'm very happy to spend more time with her on camera, and hope to see you next time. Do you have anything to say?
Nope, I think that sums it up. So
okay. Bye.
bye.
Yay.